I'm here today with Brian McLaren, an author, speaker, activist, and public theologian. He is a former college English teacher and pastor, and is an ecumenical global networker among innovative Christian leaders. Brian's best-selling books include A New Kind of Christianity, Naked Spirituality, and Why Did Jesus, Moses, the Buddha, and Muhammad Cross the Road? His latest book is We Make the Road by Walking. Thank you very much, Brian, for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
As you know, Frederick Buechner will soon be turning 90 years old. Is there anything you would like to wish for him on this great milestone?
Well, I mean, my first thought is to wish for another 90. But I suppose one of the things I would wish is that he would know how many of us his writing, how many lives his writing has enriched. And I would also hope that he would see your labors and many others being fruitful in introducing a new generation of readers to his great work. You know, his work hit my life just as I was coming of age, and I have a feeling that it will do the same for a new generation of readers.
Well, thank you, Brian. I believe that as well. I'm sure Mr. Buechner will greatly appreciate hearing from you. Next, can you tell me how you first learned about his work?
I think, Brian, that I first came across a few random quotes from other people's sermons where they would quote somebody I'd never heard of before and whose last name I didn't know how to spell. And I remember being intrigued by one of those quotes, and I went up to the speaker. I don't even remember who it was, but I went up to the speaker and I said, "Where did that quote come from?" And he said, "Frederick Buechner," and he said, "A book called The Alphabet of Grace." And so that was the first book that I went out and acquired. And I just remember, you know, I grew up in a fundamentalist setting, and one of the things for a fundamentalist is you have a lot of anxiety about the Bible. And I was uncomfortable with the literalism of my fundamentalist setting, but I was looking for people who were not in the literalist box, but who loved the Bible and thought it had something valuable and important to say. And I remember that's what really attracted me to Fred's work.
That's a great story. What would you say attracts you the most about Mr. Buechner's writing?
One of the things that attracted me most early on was his sense of humor as a reader of the Bible. You know, it seemed whatever story he was telling, whether it was the story of Nicodemus or you know, or Noah or whatever, he was not afraid to seize on the humor and irony of that biblical story. And you know, for so many people, the Bible is first and foremost about moralisms or arguments about this or that doctrine. And to enter into the humanness of the text and feel the humor of it, that really attracted me. But I think as time went on, I remember coming across a quote, I can't even remember what book it was from, but it was where Fred told a story about a kind of spiritual experience that he had, an encounter with someone that he felt he was touched by grace in that encounter. And I also think I was encouraged and helped by the fact that here's a brilliant intellect, a great literary power, but who also isn't afraid to talk about himself as a person of spiritual experience. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. To me, that's one of his biggest strengths, is his intellect and his ability to be human at the same time.
Yeah.
How would you say his work has influenced your own career or inspired anything that you've written?
Well, of course, when I first started reading Fred, I had no idea that I was going to be a writer myself. And so, you know, at that point, he was just helping me as a human being and as a person of faith. And I was a pastor and preacher, and more than once, paragraphs from his writing, you know, would work their way into my sermons. So I think he had that sort of a deep forming for me just as a human being. I would put him in a category with other writers like C.S. Lewis, who showed a deep understanding of the relationship between faith and imagination. You know, this is something I think there's, in an academic sense, in a psychological sense, as well as in a theological and spiritual sense, the relationship between faith and imagination really deserves a lot more attention than it gets. It's not so much that he theorized about it. That's just the space that he worked in. I think of it in his novel about Brendan, watching that at work. But that's, to me, one of his greatest contributions to me. For so many great intellects like Frederick Buechner's, when they talk about faith, it's primarily through the lens of analysis, academics, and so on. But here, his imagination took him to this deep personal engagement with matters of faith and spirituality. One other thing I should say, I'm just finishing up a book that will be called The Great Spiritual Migration, and in one chapter of the book, I talk about the great challenges in how we read and interpret the Bible in a postmodern, post-colonial, post-whatever context. And I talk about a way of reading Scripture that is what I call post-critical, meaning we've gone through all the work of critical reading, critical thinking, but we don't stop there. We progress to a personal and kind of human engagement with matters of faith, and that's something. It's a very short list of people who have been embodying that for decades, and I think he's really one of the first.
Well, thank you, Brian. I think that's a wonderful set of insights that you've shared there. Which of Mr. Buechner's books would you say has meant the most of you? You mentioned a couple of different ones, but just looking at across the entire spectrum, which do you think have meant the most to you?
Well, Brendan really meant a great deal to me. I just love that book. Obviously, I engaged deeply with Secrets in the Dark because I was asked to write a foreword to it, and I've read and reread those sermons many, many times that became the chapters of that book. I think of one chapter where he tells the story of going. I think it was the first gay wedding he'd ever been to, and just having a former Presbyterian minister and a great writer tell that story in such a personal way was very meaningful for me. So I would say those would probably be at the top of my list. Although I must say that going back to Alphabet of Grace, there are just so many treasures in that one too.
Well, thank you. I have to tell you that I agree with you about Secrets in the Dark. That is absolutely my favorite book of his, and there's so much value in those sermons. It's amazing.
Yeah.
More broadly speaking, what influence would you say Mr. Buechner has had on Christianity and the world at large?
Well, I think I would have two different answers to that question depending on whether people are coming more from a conservative background, as I did, or more from a more progressive or liberal background, as a lot of other folks do. I think for people from a conservative background, there's a real struggle to integrate the personal dimensions and commitments of faith with a robust intellectual life and a freedom to ask any question and a freedom to be honest about all facets of human experience. And he was doing that in a way that would work for me coming from my background. I think for a lot of my colleagues who come from the opposite side of the spectrum, it was that having a freedom to intellectually engage with matters of faith and certainly matters of Scripture, that was a given. But he didn't stop there and had a personal dimension, a personal engagement, a deeply personal reflection on how these matters of faith made a difference to him. I think I can't even remember exactly which book it was from, but he has a description of being at SeaWorld, which of course has had all kinds of controversy and all the rest in recent years, but of the wonder of sitting and watching human beings and animals interact, you know. And he described it. I remember the first time I read that paragraph, it literally brought tears to my eyes, because it was an experience that I think people from whatever background could identify with and see the holiness of that moment, of the sunshine and the orcas jumping and the people interacting peacefully with other creatures on the earth, you know. So I guess it becomes a coming together ground for people from a wide variety of backgrounds who need a certain balance and integration that he embodied, and quite naturally, it seems to me, from the start.
I think that's an excellent perspective and a way to frame what he's meant to different people. I realize this next question is difficult, but if you were to sum up Fred or Fred's writings in a few words, what would you say?
Moments of grace erupt unexpectedly in the middle of human experience. That would probably be it. And whether it's in the epic story of Brendan, or it's in a sitting on a bench at SeaWorld, he just gives example after example of that, or sitting at his first experience at a gay wedding.
That's excellent. Wonderful summary. Before we finish, is there anything else that you'd like to pass along?
Well, I sure want to say happy birthday, and I sure want to say thanks from the bottom of my heart. And I want to say thanks to you as well, because I know you've done such a great job of helping get Frederick Buechner's work out there. And I hope a lot of folks will become evangelists of the beautiful perspective on faith that he's embodied for these many years.
Well, great. Thank you so much, Brian. We really appreciate you taking the time to do this, and I know Mr. Buechner will appreciate it very much as well.
Thank you.
Again.